Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. And now I'm going to be doing story time. You remember at the top of the podcast, I told you that one of the reasons that an ERISA disability or association disability policy can be bad news is the restrictive definition of disability. I think we can learn from court cases, and that's why I call this story time. Sometimes court cases read like a mystery story. Sometimes they read like a fairy tale. And other times they read like a horror story. I want to tell you the horror story of Dr. Evans and his claim against Standard Insurance Company. The name of this story is How Standard Used the Own Occupation Clause to Deny a Diagnostic Radiologist His Long-Term Disability Benefits. The policy definition of own occupation can make all the difference in whether you get your benefits. So in the case of Dr. Evans, the term own occupation was defined by the disability policy to mean if your own occupation involves the rendering of professional services and you're required to have a professional or occupational license to work, your own occupation is as broad as the scope of your license. However, if your own occupation is a medical doctor or dentist, we'll consider your own occupation to be the one general or subspecialty in which you're board certified to practice, provided that you earn at least 60% of your gross professional income in your specialty or subspecialty during the 24 months immediately before you became disabled. If the subspecialty in which you're practicing isn't recognized by the American Board of Medical Specialties or American Dental Association, you'll be considered as practicing in the general specialty category. That's a lot of words. And what on earth is the standard of occupation and disability? Well, in the Evans case, he was awarded a specialty certificate in diagnostic radiology by the American Board of Radiology. At the time he applied for his benefits, he worked at the University of Virginia, and he worked entirely in the field of interventional radiology, including neurointerventional surgical procedures. He claimed he was disabled as a result of chronic anemia due to radiation. His physicians all said that he couldn't work as a neurointerventional radiologist and he couldn't be exposed to x-rays. Sounds like a winning claim, doesn't it? Now, he was still certified in diagnostic radiology. So the issue is, was his own occupation a diagnostic radiologist or an interventional radiologist? Let's take a vote. While we tabulate the answers, I want to consider what Standard did with his application. The first thing they did is they had it reviewed by a claims adjuster for those policy language exceptions. Two, they had it reviewed by a forensic accountant to determine, based on his ICD-9 codes, what his occupation was and the percentage of time he spent doing different types of procedures. They had it reviewed by their own in-house doctor to determine his restrictions and limitations, including his ability to be exposed to x-rays. They also had it reviewed by their own in-house vocational evaluator to determine Dr. Evans' occupation. So what did the vocational case manager do? Well, the first thing the VE did was to note Dr. Evans' certification. Secondly, the vocational evaluator reviewed Dr. Evans' current CPT codes and billing records that had been analyzed by the carrier's forensic accountant. They noted that over 60% of his professional income was for interventional radiology. But Dr. Evans wasn't board certified in that field. Despite the terms of the policy, the vocational evaluator concluded that his occupation was a diagnostic radiologist. What did Standard do with the VE opinion? Well, they took it and they ran with it. They argued that because he was able to perform at least one material duty of a diagnostic radiologist, that his claim should be denied, notwithstanding the fact that his income, at least 60% of it, came from his work as an interventional radiologist. Standard said, look, Dr. Evans decided to stop performing these procedures, and that in and of itself didn't constitute a disability. And in fact, we don't think it matters that further radiation exposure would place him for risk for the progression of his anemia and possibly developing leukemia. Standard said that, look, while Dr. Evans might be unable to perform the work activities of an interventional radiologist, he could still be a physician and he could still be a diagnostic radiologist without undergoing any additional or undue exposure to radiation. Interesting. So what did Dr. Evans do? Well, Dr. Evans appealed. I would have told him to appeal. He argued that Standard's conclusion that his occupation was a diagnostic radiologist was wrong, and that his own occupation was that of an interventional radiologist, particularly since 60% of his income was coming from his work as an interventional radiologist. So what did the court do? Well, unfortunately, the court disagreed with Dr. Evans, and they said, look, we don't care, we don't think it's enough that he made more than 60% of his income from performing his interventional procedures. We're going to look at what we think is the operative policy language. And the court said, we think that a carrier could reasonably interpret this language to require that the physician be board certified in the specialty or subspecialty for that to qualify as the physician's own occupation. And in this case, he was boarded as a diagnostic radiologist. And so the court said, too bad, so sad, and upheld the denial. Now, I think that was an absolutely wrong decision, and you can see why I think it was a horror story. But more importantly, you can see how the policy definition of own occupation can make or break a disability claim. What's the definition of own occupation in your policy? Well, let's find out what the results of the poll was. Stay tuned, and I'll be back in a second. Well, what were the poll results? The poll results were that Dr. Evans should be getting his disability benefits, and that the carrier and the court were wrong. You can see why understanding the definition of disability in your policy makes all the difference. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Stay tuned, and if you haven't subscribed to our show, please do so. Leave a rating or review in iTunes for us. I look forward to talking with you next week. Thank you.